With the underwhelming release of the Gaela Delve Living World season, ArenaNet pivoted to yet another new release cadence, which is nothing new to the Guild Wars 2 community, as we've shifted from just Living World to expansions plus Living World into sagas, now expansions plus 1 2-part map or whatever. If you count the Tunnel, which was probably the worst received release up to this point, Secrets of the Obscure is probably the worst received expansion up to this point in terms of general community sentiment. With the follow-up expansion recently announced, we will finally be able to compare SOTO to its supposedly equal counterpart. And while ArenaNet did release a retrospective, it is far more corporate than it is critical, and failed to address some of the outright failures of that expansion. Before we get into the analysis, let me say that for $25, it is entirely worth purchasing. $25 in 2024 is like 5 beefy 5-layer burritos at Taco Bell, and you can barely get a McDonald's meal for less than $16. So yeah, it's worth it despite these criticisms, and it is one of the most competitive games in terms of value for dollar cost. With that said, let's first address the features. SOTO introduced open world legendary armor, new weapons, weapon mastery training, the sky scale in an alternative collection, and 3 new maps. For those of you who watch my Zero to Hero series, I did discount the Wizard's Vault because it is a daily login reward systems rework instead of an actual expansion feature, so I don't really count that. There are a total of 3 non-legendary armor sets, a handful of weapon skins, and a long list of rewards that are only really used in the rewards that I mentioned earlier, so the armor sets or the legendary armor. A relic system was tacked on to the already mess that is the Guild Wars 2 gearing system, and that caused a lot of pain for the endgame community. Comparing SOTO to any other expansion, it falls short in both raw introductions into the game, story, pacing, and themes, and content quality at the end game, which I think was the most painful part next to the release cadence. Its main criticisms from my end come from the lack of introduction of new features on launch. Legendary armor, the new weapons excluding Weapon Master, and the legendary relic took months after launch of the expansion to be introduced, leaving many players with nothing to do despite a new update. The legendary relic was given to players for free in a pop-up if you had the legendary rune unlocked. Despite this contradicting earlier communications from the studio, the map's primary focus was around collecting materials for items that weren't introduced yet. There was no roadmap on how currencies were needed or how many were needed. This led players to just endlessly grind and make assumptions about the content that was coming out, and its overall poor expectations management from the studio. It is fine to be hype about the game and its upcoming releases. I feel that's healthy. However, at that point, many of the players that were performing this grind were already customers. Like, they already had SOTO, they already had the other expansions. So communicating what would be used or how it would be used or obtained would have been helpful. I don't see how putting out the final release crafting recipe in a blog post would have spoiled anything story related or otherwise, and that could have alleviated some of the pain with this endless grind. Now that it is completely released in all of its glory, many of these pain points have vanished. However, the story pacing with the fill in the bar filler quests are now just a general annoyance. The we must wait and gather our strength parts of the story that are hard written feel out of place, and the overall size of the story being told is a pain point ArenaNet already addressed. But one thing they did not address is the content quality. For the most part, new content is better than no content, but I must remind you that we all paid for this content. Yes, it was only $25, but Dagda normal mode and Cirrus normal mode are boring. Dagda CM mode is okay, while Cirrus CM and LM mode are pretty much uninteractable by the wider player base. The worst offender is the Lonely Tower Fractal, and it is an absolute disgrace, primarily due to the encounter design, the slew of bugs associated with the fight, and how the encounter functions overall. The Fractal is the primary concern because of the daily Fractal system. It cannot be effectively ignored without interfering with players' daily gameplay loops. As somebody who grinded out Fractal God, if a Fractal is skipped or groups tend to skip a given Fractal, it significantly delays the process and the progress that you make towards those goals. Before Silent Surf was released, Fractals had a significant, predictable design pattern with fast-paced bosses in both mechanics and overall clear times, but ArenaNet is getting creative with client-side mechanics, meaning that other group members were helpless if a member failed, or the attack overlap and lack of proper telegraphing that we see in the Lonely Tower makes the Fractals really unfun to play. The Fractal community has been neglected overall and outright nerfed with the removal of Mystic Coins from CMs, and the lack of understanding of what these encounters are supposed to be like is causing players like myself who were Fractal enthusiasts to essentially walk away from the game mode entirely. Overall, the encounter design and the approach to what makes a boss hard needs to focus around less HP and more damaging attacks. If Dagda Normal or CM had about 30% less HP but her attacks were doubled in damage, it would be far more engaging. If Epark's attacks were less stacked and there was a 3 or 4 second cooldown between each ability use instead of just blasting them out like a DPS rotation, it would solve a lot of the problems that we see with that Fractal. While I haven't done the Lonely Tower CM yet, from my understanding, its clear is reliant on abusing bugs to clear the ad phase, and there's no way to clear boss buffs, which may be a bug, leading to a frustrating long fight that players won't want to interact with or repeat. With that said, we have the Janthir Wilds coming up, and before I get into that, I want to say if you would like to pre-order it, I do have SNEB's referral link in my description. Now, I don't know SNEB besides a comment that he made on one of my videos, but if you are looking to support a creator, especially a North American creator in this community, his referral link is in the description below. He has some big life events coming up and could use the cash from the kickback that will help him continue to be a part of this community while all of his life stuff is going on. That being said, Janthir is expected to have some Warclaw stuff, player housing, the spear, a raid wing, a fractal, 2 maps, and some more stuff. The information is still coming out, so there's not much more to get hype about. They do have new animations on the spear, and I do love the idea of a raid wing, but based on the recent releases, it's hard for me to get hype about the in-game content based around just the sheer quality that they've had recently. If it is a raid wing of HP sponges, it is going to get skipped. If there is no LI rework or rewards rework in raids, it's going to get skipped. I am looking forward to the spear to some degree and the new environments, and I'm hoping that ArenaNet learned their lesson from Inner Nyos and the legendary armor. These new maps need rewards that all players can get excited about: 30 gold per hour farms, currencies that can be converted into more traditional currencies, or the reversion to volatile magic entirely would be fine for most players. For me, a good meta event would be something that is fast-paced, meaning it can be completable in about 30 minutes from start to finish, something with a solid traditional reward structure, something that has a high roll item that can be cosmetic, an infusion, or a housing item, but it has to be valuable. Speaking of player housing and reinventing the wheel, this is a feature that I am most skeptical about, since if done poorly, it just fails altogether, and it is clearly a ton of development resources. Upgrading your home needs to have some account bound or monetary gain. So far, we have had numerous hubs that we can upgrade with in-game items: Sun's Refuge, the home instance, guild halls, all kind of scratching this itch to some degree, but a new crafting discipline is unnecessary, and that is what it's going to be using. I would like to see them incorporate some of the in-game unlockables for farming plots, mining nodes, or some other way to get feedback to the account that is valuable. It can't just be a gold and gems sink. Now, like I said, I have already pre-ordered the next expansion, and I am excited to see what they do with it. Hopefully there are some lessons learned incorporated, and I feel that with SOTO being done, it is a far better deal at $25 than it was pre-ordering it and waiting for these updates. But even still, I am willing to see what ArenaNet is doing with this next one, and I am looking forward to the next expansion. I rate SOTO about a 5 out of 10, and it is arguably the worst expansion to date, but it is still worth getting, especially if you are a newer player, and it is a better experience now than it was on launch. With that, I want to thank you for watching. If you dig the content, please consider subscribing. Use SNEB's referral link in the description below if you're going to buy the X-Pack, and I will see you on the next one. Peace.